Hi, I'm Tiffany Jana, and I'm the co-author of Erasing Institutional Bias.
And I'm Ashley Diaz Mejias, and I am the other co-author of Erasing Institutional Bias.
Institutional bias is bias that operates at a systemic level. So instead of interpersonal bias, where one person has a favor or disfavor for a person or a thing, it is when that operates at a large scale and affects a lot of people at one time.
I think the most obvious way is when we experience inequity, whether it's because of our race or our gender or any number of experiences of oppression that many of us have. One of the ways that we focused on personal experiences of institutional bias in the book was through the experience of stereotype threats. So stereotype threats are kind of these unconscious anxieties that are usually can be very personal, can feel very overwhelming, and there is a lot of good research out there that talks about the way that these stereotype threats can actually undermine our own performances. So, for example, if you've ever found yourself, this is a positive example, if you've ever found yourself in a room of friends and you're talking and you're feeling really funny, you might feel like you're really on that night, you're really making people laugh. Researchers are able to somehow demonstrate that you likely are being perceived as being funnier that night. The flip side of all of this is when people have negative perceptions about gender minorities, racial minorities, etc., and we're aware of those negative stereotypes about ourselves, we're more likely to have reduced capacity. The anxiety and the energy that it takes to kind of mitigate and to manage those anxieties can really significantly impact our performance. So that impacts test taking, that impacts job performance, that impacts our health. So really and truly, it doesn't actually matter what the real life people around you think. If you've been exposed to those stereotypes throughout your life, they can have a measurable impact on your performance and on your lifestyle. And the more we talked to people, the more it became clear that this is a real threat to our flourishing. So.
Yeah, and privilege plays into the institutional bias conversation in some very interesting ways, so many different ways. One of them is this idea that, first of all, I have to preface it by saying that we all have some degree of privilege. So privilege is not something that is, relegated only to a particular demographic or, anything like that. So you can't just say, oh, if you're a white male Christian, you have all of the privilege, and I'm a black woman, I don't have privilege. Doesn't work that way. We all have some. But what privilege does in the context of this conversation is it creates blind spots for us. It creates places where it's much, much more difficult for us to see and understand and experience sometimes the institutional bias that's at play. So the more areas where you are experiencing privilege, the more you have to lose in your mind. It kind of creates a threat response if those biases are addressed in the system. So it is. I like to tell people that while nobody actually who's sitting here right now created the origin of the biases that we're dealing with, but that doesn't let us off the hook. As a society, as a species, we do have some accountability to each other. So this work really does start with the individual. We have to look at our own stuff. We have to identify our areas of privilege, because where we have those privileges, we might actually be contributing to institutional bias without being aware of it. So I think most of us would consider ourselves decent people, and in doing so, we do have a responsibility to look and see, how am I possibly benefiting from an institutional bias that might exist here? How might I be sort of supporting that? How might I be reinforcing that bias? And those are really hard questions to ask, but those are the kinds of questions that we invite people to grapple with in the context of the book so that they can take action. And the way that we wrote Erasing Institutional Bias is such that you don't have to be the CEO of a company, you don't have to be at the top of an institution or a system in order to affect change. The idea is that anybody can identify where there might be some bias and then do some of the personal work required to gather data, reflect on your own role in the context of that, and affect some change. So we're not powerless is the message there. So one of my favorite things about this book is that we got a lot of stories from a lot of different people about their individual experiences. So rather than write a book that was purely academic or purely theoretical or just based in research, we wanted to hear from people and hear their stories. And we hope that you're able to find yourself in the stories and maybe learn from the solutions that other folks have come up with. And if you do read the book and you enjoy it, please do rate us on Amazon and give us a review. And if you find your story, engage with us on social media. Please like the Erasing Institutional Bias page, and you can find both of us as authors on social media as well. Thanks so much.